She is the founder and chief executive officer of Climate and Nature Solutions. She is Canada's former Minister of Environment and Climate Change, as well as the Minister of Infrastructure. She is the chair of the UN Secretary General's high-level expert group on net zero commitments of non-state entities, which released its Integrity Matters report at COP27 in Egypt in 2022, setting out criteria for net zero commitments of business, financial institutions, cities, and regions. She founded Women Leading on Climate Change and is a distinguished visiting fellow at Columbia Climate School and a visiting professor in practice at the Grantham Research Institute at the London School of Economics. She is an advisor to the Climate Data Steering Committee for the Macron-Bloomberg Net Zero Data Public Utility, Singapore's International Advisory Panel for Carbon Credits, the Task Force on Net Zero Policy, the LSE Just Transition Finance Lab, as well as to the University of Ottawa's Information Integrity Lab. She also advises many private sector boards, and she is a frequent speaker on climate action, net zero leadership, and women empowerment. What continues to drive your commitment to climate action even after your tenure as Environment Minister has ended?
Look, when first of all, I always have to clarify a slight misconception people may have. I did not leave politics because I was driven out, all the attacks. I actually just made a decision, and I was pretty transparent. I did a press conference. One was leaving to be with my kids, because I'd been in politics since my youngest was 6, I think. And I have 3 kids, and they were getting ready. Well, they were in high school, and it had been through COVID. And secondly, I just wanted to work on climate. And I felt like there was, we'd done a ton in Canada, but we were going to have to wrestle with fossil fuel companies. And there's only so much that I can do. And there are a lot of things that have to happen globally, and a lot of the lessons that we learned, in particular, dealing with oil and gas, that I thought, and coal as well, that I thought could be useful. So I just, I left. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I just decided I didn't want to work for anyone else. You might understand, being in politics, people try to boss you around. I'm not very bossable, but they tried. So I just decided to start my own business. Actually, I have a number of my former staff, and we work on scaling climate and nature solutions. So scale is critically important. We work globally. But I also got asked by the Secretary General, totally unexpected, to do a report. It's got a very long, fancy name, but you can't understand it. Really, it was to set real clear criteria and standards for net zero. So 90% of global domestic product is covered by a net zero commitment. But the reality is we're not making fast enough progress. So there is a lot of greenwashing. So he wanted to be very clear about what was required. So that was unexpected. I did that. And I've done a number of things, but I only do things because I only do things that I want, that I think are important, and in particular that we're going to scale climate action. So that's what I do. And I will say my CV does sound kind of funny because I never had it all planned out. To be honest, I had started a charity that was called Canadian Lords Abroad, doing work globally on, but we intersected with climate, but my focus wasn't really on climate. I thought, oh, those climate people, I care about climate. That's part of the reason I ran, but I wasn't like, had been to all these climate conferences forever. So it was really the Prime Minister asked me to be the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to learn everything. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of opportunities, but I've always been driven by how do we get the action we need? Because in particular, I have 3 kids. So it's as much about their future as anything else.
Excellent. And I think we share in common having kids, obviously. I find in those hard times when I'm not really sure about continuing on or this is a little too tough. Someone said to me a long time ago, and I remember it very fondly, is when you kind of give up, you're taking the things that you can't solve and shouldering it onto your children, into generations that don't even, haven't even come to age of majority yet, right? So it doesn't mean you have to self-sacrifice to the point of abuse, but also there is that internal push for me, and it sounds like for you as well, to make sure that we're doing the best we can to steward for future generations. I think sometimes what you were saying, about how climate people maybe misunderstand your situation and misunderstand maybe climate. When you get into the work, you start to see that there are the talking points of climate, and which aren't always well informed, And then there's those little lesser known pieces of climate action that can be very powerful and inspirational or hopeful. So what are some lesser known yet critical aspects of climate change and climate action, that the public should be more aware of, more than just like, carbon tax and that sort of like, what are some things that are some real meaty things that could possibly, help people understand this issue a little bit better?
I mean, it's hard to know where to go with that. Like heat pumps work. So if I could get everyone on a heat pump, there are people, because we have entrenched interests that say, oil and gas companies, they want you to stay burning oil and gas forever. But we have solutions. So I would say there's that. But I think that I was just doing a talk today at the Montreal Climate Summit. And people said, like, there's always this question, like, it must be hard for, because, there's always this, dichotomy, environment and the economy. Like when I was an infrastructure minister, maybe a better example, because it was great. I had money. And I was like, every single dollar is going to get triple outcomes. I'm a mom and we got to be very frugal with our money and we got to stretch it. And I said, it has to get climate outcomes. It's got to create jobs and growth because we were coming out of COVID. And it's got to deal with inequality. And I think the reality actually, which is very interesting, is that you actually generally can achieve those objectives when you take climate action. You can also build a healthier planet too, like with addressing air pollution. So, I mean, you take public transit and obviously public transit, it's got to be built. So it creates jobs and growth, but it also helps reduce emissions. And it is something that addresses inequality, because the folks that are most likely to use public transit are the ones that don't have other options. So that's people that are lower income, it's young people, it's seniors. And so I think that that's a way of thinking of it, because often people are like, affordability, how can you deal with that? And some people mean it like, they're just trying to be very difficult. And there are many people that don't want to do things. And I mean that more like oil and gas and entrenched interests, some politicians, sadly. But then there are others who are just questioning it. And I think like even I will just address the elephant in the room, putting a price on pollution. We did it in the most affordable way, such that most people are better off. And why is that? Because if you, live in an apartment and you live downtown, you don't have a big carbon footprint, you get the same amount of money as someone who has a massive house and multiple vehicles and a cottage. And so it's always trying to be thoughtful. So that's kind of like, maybe that's a bit meta.
No, it's
But
great.
it's just looking at climate from a different way. Like I do think when we think about what solutions there are, like the health angle, I think is really important. And when we think about multiple benefits, so when we have public transit or we have active transportation, we have bike trails, we have walking trails, like that's also a better lifestyle and a healthier lifestyle. And maybe I'm telling you all of you this, and you already know it, but I think how we communicate to people about climate action, because that's what I like to say. I should have my mug here. I had all these sayings. My staff would laugh at my sayings, but I'd be like, climate is the thing. It is an everything thing. And it is true. Climate is a national security issue. We have subs in our north that are going through because we have we have thawing ice. It's a health issue because look at our wildfires. Look at what it did in terms of the air quality. As my friends in the US say, oh, great, your greatest export now is smoke. It's an Indigenous issue. Indigenous communities are the most impacted by climate change, but they also have solutions. So you can literally go across the board and make climate an everything thing. And I think the more that we can be targeted in how we talk to our friends and neighbors about what do they care about. Because I don't care why people care about climate action. I don't care. If it's just because they're going to save money, great. If it's because they care about health and their kid has asthma, great. If it's because they're Indigenous and, their community is being greatly impacted, great. I don't care. But I think we're going to have to we always have to think about the positive frame. So that isn't so much solutions. I mean, the solutions are there. And that's what probably gets me up in the morning, because it's just infuriating that we have the solutions, but we can't seem to like figure it out like right now what we need to do. But we have the solutions, and I think we just need to talk in a more positive frame about them and push back on people who are like job-killing carbon tax. And the reason I did do that, I was reminded of that. I created the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition of Businesses. So when I had to go to question period, I don't know if anyone watches question period, don't, it's terrible. But I had Pierre Polyev. He'd ask me every single question. He was my critic, so I'm very familiar with him. This is not a news story that he's on carbon pricing, but I had this list. So he would say, job killing carbon tax, what are you going to do? Blah, 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 blah. And I just read. I had all these companies. I had the largest companies in Canada that wanted a price on pollution because it would create the incentive for them to be able to invest in clean solutions. And so I just list the company and how many jobs it had. And then he'd come back. I was like, oh, okay, great. I got another company for you. Like, I don't think they're job killers. I think they're called job creators. And I do that. So I think, I just think we're all going to have to be quite disciplined in how we talk to our friends and neighbors and putting it in a positive frame and not allowing people to put it in this very binary, you climate action or no one's going to have jobs in Canada. That's just like literally not true. There are many more jobs in the clean economy. We have to think about communities. We have to think about workers. But oil and gas companies don't care about workers or communities. They will fire people as much as they can. They're trying to, they're trying to, what am I trying to say? They're trying to, I want to say computerize. No, they're trying to automate everything they can. So they don't want to invest. But that's up to the government, and we do need to be thoughtful. But there's so many reasons why climate action is awesome. And it's not just because we want a sustainable future for our kids, although it's definitely that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's, you reminded me of something that I say. I don't have mugs made, but maybe I should start thinking of my own mugs. One of the ways we talk, or we used to talk about climate action, like as a whole as society, was this idea of, I always say, like pipelines and polar bears. Like if you're not impacting one of those two things, and you're not doing climate action, but climate action is how you build your community. It's where you build your roads or don't build your roads. It's where you have community centers, and like there's so many things to climate action beyond things that we've always talked about that are removed, right? And so we're trying really hard here to say climate action is very local. It's not removed from you. 100%. It's in every decision your municipal council, your provincial representatives, federal, like it's in everything. So you're right, it isn't everything. So I like that. And I think what that leads me to is like, next question is, that intersection between politics and effective climate action. Not always a happy marriage, but how has your understanding of that marriage or intersection evolved from your time in office to now outside of engagements outside of office?
I mean, look, when you're in a role like mine, all you think is like every nail, the hammer is government. So you're always like, oh, got to do everything. Government's got to do everything. But the reality, and I see this sometimes even, when I look at my own party, I'm like, oh, politicians will break your heart. And so the reality is you're not always going to get the government you need to deliver on the policy. But that doesn't mean you give up. So when Trump came in, I was like, okay, everyone stop crying now. Like that, we can't do that. We're just going to have to move forward. And there was this we're all in movement in the US. So that was businesses, cities and regions that really stepped up and demonstrated that they were still moving forward. Globally, I created the Ministerial on Climate Action, and it was with China and the EU. It was a very different time with China, but we needed to have a bulwark against the US and say, look, we're moving forward. So I think that there really is an important role for every other actor. Like, hopefully politicians do the right thing, and voting matters. And we need to emphasize that to folks. Like, yeah, you can be, you have imperfect choices, but the reality, there are real consequences to decisions. But you're not always going to get good politicians. Like, it was very hard. I came in, it was kind of great. I had the four major provinces all had a government. They were of different political persuasions, but they believed in climate. So that's how we built carbon pricing. We basically said, you can do a cap and trade system, you can do a direct price and fill your boots. If you don't do it, then we're going to have a backstop. And then suddenly we lost, like, Ontario, the most moronic thing ever. They got rid of cap and trade. Like, the businesses are like, what? They had some certainty, they were moving forward, but that was the first decision. We saw then Alberta fell. And then we saw it was a cascading impact. We did win 2 elections, by the way, on carbon pricing. My first one in 2019, I was petrified. It was like fighting every single day. I'm like, we can't lose the election. It'll be all my fault. But we won. And I think that was because people, were committed and they voted. So, I mean, I think we can't just hope that government will solve everyone's problems. And in any event, that's just not even the reality, because while the federal government has a target, and everyone's like, well, is the federal government going to meet the target? I was like, okay, well, the provinces have to do things because they're in their jurisdiction, or cities and regions have to do things, or business has to step up and do things. And so that is really important. And that's how you create an ambition loop. So an ambition loop is really like, in the context, say, take a government that is not that committed to climate action, maybe it's time for businesses to really step up and push governments to do more. Say, like, we want this, because often governments will listen to business, and they need to have folks that are pushing them or supporting them. I mean, I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer. I mean, certainly elections matter. Certainly it's 100% better to have a government that's committed on climate action, but we also need everyone else to be all in, and we need, we need support. Like when I was in government, I needed support of business, and I could build on when subnationals, so provinces or municipalities, did things. It was easier to build on those things as well. So I think there are a lot of actors in the ecosystem. It's not just one, it's not just one level of government, it's multiple levels of government. It's multiple different players, from businesses to financial institutions, to, local organizations. And sometimes other actors are really going to have to step up if you're going to have politicians that aren't.
Yeah, no,
But
I love that.
elections
I
matter,
love
so
that.
vote. So vote for parties. I'm going to tell you how to vote. Vote for parties committed to climate action if you want to see climate action.
Yeah, and also remember, climate action is an everything thing. So you're not just voting for climate action, but you're voting for other things as well, right? Equity and accessible communities and smart growth. And I think you bring about a really interesting point when you're talking about putting too much faith in politics. I'm paraphrasing here, so I don't mean to interpret in a way you didn't mean, but I think there is a dominant feeling of that politics is the main power structure, right? They are the ones with all the power and authority, and yet there's other types of power in communities, non-official type individual power. So you've experienced all those various forms of power, from official to grassroots movements. And when you're talking about this, it makes me think that there's probably power structures that people turn to and think they're going to lead them the right way. So those are power structures that need to be reformed. And maybe there's other power structures that need to be strengthened to advance climate action effectively. So how do you think, like, are there types of power that we should be focusing more on, and ones maybe that we should either restructure or focus less on, depending on the situation?
Well, I mean, I could go to proportional representation, which my government did not do. I mean, that would have an impact, I think, although you're seeing in Europe that now you have right-wing parties actually, gaining a lot of power. And so they're combining, but that would definitely have an impact in terms of, power structures. Maybe social media, that's a real problem. We got to change social media, both because of online hate, but also massive disinformation. So I do a lot of work on that. But I've been thinking about this a lot because, like, look, we might get a Trump administration. Last time I did not think it was going to happen. I was at a party with the US ambassador with a whole bunch of people, and I had my daughter with me, and she's like tugging at my shirt. And she's like, Mom, it's not looking good. And she's 8. And I was like, oh, no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And then I get a call then I'm kind of looking over. I'm like, oh, no, this looks kind of bad. And then I get a call from my chief of staff, and he's like, the cameras are on you. Get out of there now. So obviously I was surprised. But we can't be surprised this time. So I've been doing some, thinking with others about power and transformational change. And I think we have to, stop thinking about governments, but we also give power to the people. I mean, there are so many people who actually care about climate action in one way or another. Like even farmers who may not say climate change in Saskatchewan, they know that they're changing weather patterns that are having a massive impact on their crops. So I think there's this way of bringing together large groups through grassroots action often that can make a huge difference. And so I'll give you an example. So when we were fighting carbon pricing at the Supreme Court, well, first of all, you might remember the resistance. I still have a picture of on my fridge. I don't know. My kids think it's hilarious. But, these dudes, these dudes are like, oh God, like fighting me every day. And I was like, oh, they're the resistance. Well, I'm going to find the resistance to the resistance. And so who did we have who actually were interveners at the Supreme Court? We had Indigenous leaders. So all those indigenous, you have a lot of indigenous communities who actually are committed to climate action because they're the most impacted, and they also want to have solutions. I work a lot on large scale nature conservations with indigenous peoples who want to create a sustainable economy so they don't have to develop their resources. And so there's indigenous people, religious groups. So there was Green Churches Canada. I'm kind of a lapsed Catholic. I'm Irish, so you kind of, I don't know, Catholic, still kind of Catholic, but the Pope has been really incredible when it came to Laudato Si, an encyclical on climate. And there are a lot of religious groups who see it as a social justice issue. So they actually were supporting me, and they'd write letters and campaigns and do all these things to support carbon pricing. Doctors, so there's Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. And so they're talking about climate as a health issue, and they're actually giving prescriptions to people saying, you've, maybe mental health or other issues, get out to nature. So it's a prescription where you get free access to a national park. How cool is that? And so you could go down the line, like economists, okay, economists, maybe that's not that sexy, but the economists are like, yes, this is where the economic opportunity is. We don't have stranded assets. Carbon pricing works. Young people. So there's an organization called Generation Squeeze. Like, they are getting squeezed, these young people. And they're the ones who are going to deal with the fallout. So I actually think we need to think of power and transformation in a very different way, because we get stuck just waiting for governments to act, and sometimes they're terrible, and that's very disempowering. And so I think if we actually look, and municipalities, I mean, obviously municipalities, often they're at the forefront. I was with Montreal. Montreal is totally leading on climate, and one thing they did do, which you should think about, because it sounds like you're thinking about it, but a climate test. Everything they do, every policy they enact, every decision they make, they also bring in a climate lens, which is really important. So I think power, we need to be thinking about power differently, but it's also more empowering to bring in people. Like when I go to COPs, so the conferences of the party, I go to these climate meetings, it's the elite. It doesn't matter. It's elite of young people. It's elite of environmentalists, elite. We have to bring power more to the people so they feel like they can have action. And action, of course, it is what you do. But I'm actually, not that I'm less worried about that, but it puts a lot of pressure on people. Like maybe you can't change to a heat pump, or maybe you can't get an electric vehicle. But I think that, if you are scaling action, working with other people, pushing, for political parties to do better, or pushing for more funding for whatever your community needs, or doing all of these things working together, I think we can actually have the scale impact that we need, and we'll feel better about it because we'll all be working together, and you won't feel like you're all on your own trying to, roll a rock uphill. That you're actually part of this transformation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's where, our coalition's been around since 2015. And the work that the member groups do, some of them are ratepayers, some of them are climate activists, some of them are social service groups, healthcare groups. But there's always a vision about, hey, actually, we really want to build something better for tomorrow than what we have today. So I know that we have a couple of questions online, but I want to ask you, I really enjoyed that explanation about power and thinking about it differently. And so with that kind of jump off point, we've got a lot of community advocates listening to you in person and then online. What advice would you give to those community advocates to enhance their effectiveness, whether it comes to embracing their own power or engaging with politicians on environmental issues?
Well, I mean, like, look, the Greenbelt Coalition, or everyone that decided that they cared about the Greenbelt. I mean, ironically, Doug Ford actually put in legislation what no one else had done to protect the Greenbelt, just to kind of cover his ass, really. But that was people power. So I think these coalitions where you bring together folks that are unusual suspects, like farmers with environmentalists, with folks that are in rural areas. I mean, the more we can do that, obviously, the better it is. But I think that one thing that is really important, and I really work hard at it, is trying to talk like real people talk. And I'm sure you do. I mean, you sound like you do, Margaret. Everyone does. But I hang out with, environmentalists and climate people a lot. And I'm like, no one understands what you're saying. Like net zero, even adaptation, mitigation, 2050. Like everyone's like, what are you talking about? And so I think that is really, really a problem. And it's even like when we started with carbon pricing, like I was like, okay, how are we going to talk about this? And so we started with carbon tax, but I didn't really start that. But just imagine you started carbon tax. We pulled on it. Terrible. No one wants taxes. And then we did carbon pricing. No one really knew what it was, but it was definitely pulled better. And then we did a price on pollution, a lot better. People don't like pollution. They think there should be a price on pollution. And then the epically good one is when you can say, well, should it be free to pollute? Or it can't be free to pollute, because you can go into grade 4 class, and I would do this often. I'd say, hey kids, do you think it should be free to pollute? And they're like, no. So, you kind of hit the sweet spot when regular people and kids are like, yeah, I totally get it. So I think that is important. And related to that is what I said before, is just going to where people are at. People are going to care about things for a whole variety of different reasons. And once again, I don't really care why people care about climate action. I don't think we should care. We should recognize that people have different, perspectives, but actually, because climate's an everything issue, you can generally make an argument. Like your argument for your business friends, like, who works on Bay Street, can be like, oh, we're in a race. Do we want to lose the race to the US? Because boy, a lot of money's getting invested there. And if we don't set the right conditions, we're going to lose out. We're going to lose out to Europe. We're going to lose out to China. Like that's I think we have to really think hard about how to do that, because I think sometimes it can feel like you're guilting people. And the last thing, randomly, I don't know if anyone knows Michael Mann. So he's like a world leading climate scientist. And I just saw on Twitter, he gets a lot of hate on Twitter, but luckily the two of us, we don't care. We're still there. And I saw he was in Ottawa. I was like, oh my God, he's at the Writers Trust Festival, and we defend each other online. So I went and saw him, and he came to my porch, and we had a drink afterwards. And we were talking, and I said, like, what is the most annoying, or what gets you down? He's like, when people say we can't do it. He's like, we can reach 1.5. Yeah, is it a stretch goal? It's a stretch goal. It's bloody hard, but hard things are hard. And, we have the solutions. So we just have to keep on keeping on, and not, sometimes it's easy to kind of diminish asks or what we're pushing for. And I said to people when I was a minister, I was like, no, be on the streets and tell us, we suck sometimes, because we suck sometimes, because it only helps me. When people would do that, people thought they were making me feel bad. I was like, no, we bought a pipeline, make us feel bad. Like then I can get more action, a whole bunch of other areas. And so I think we should also just be real. Like, don't go by halves because you think that is what people, especially politicians, want to hear. They will do that anyway. Don't you worry. Like, I think you just have to be pushing the ambition, and also have the can-do attitude. So I'm a competitive swimmer sort of still, which is funny. I do some races, much slower than I used to be. But when I was a kid, or actually I'll put it in better context. I can't see anyone's hands, but does anyone know Summer McIntosh?
Yes.
Okay, Summer, if you don't know Summer McIntosh, you will know her this summer. So Summer McIntosh is an amazing competitive swimmer. She's broken world records already. She's only 16. So Summer McIntosh, when she was probably 8, maybe younger, I think I saw a picture like when she was like at Olympic trials, like getting signatures from swimmers that were Olympians, she would have had a stretch goal, and her friends and everyone would have said, like, what are you talking about? You're not going to go to the Olympics and break a world record and have that time and do whatever. And she's like, oh yeah, okay, watch me. And then what did she do? She just got up every single day and worked super hard, and then got in the blocks and swam and wasn't fast enough. So then she went back and trained some more and just continued to do that. And look where she is now. And the reality is, you're going to go about 1,000,000 times further, even if you don't get exactly where you want to be, if you actually have dream big, work hard, get up every day. And then, as I say, put your head down and drive for the wall at the end. And that's the kind of thing that I think we need to translate to people, because it's positive. I say this to business leaders, who wants to be a loser? Everyone wants to be a winner. So I'm like, okay, well, think like a winner. Stretch goals 1.5, no excuses. Like, do the work, and you'll innovate, and you'll do more, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, well, you're really making me feel better, because there was times when we were hoping to have a lot of the area in Simcoe County covered with more protective land use policies, including the green belt. And we were thinking, like, why not get ahead of developments, section off the areas that we know are important to us, and then also build communities in the areas that are already established, right? And people would say, that's really ambitious. You want this whole area? Like politicians aren't going to agree to that. And I'm like, well, so like they're probably going to do, if so I go in with, like you said, the 50%, they're going to give me probably 25%.
Yeah, 1000%. By the way, that's a bad negotiating tactic. Do
Yeah,
not use that
they're
tactic.
gonna talk me down. So if I push for 100 and I get 75, well, it's more than me going 50 and getting 25. And I like how we've had a couple of questions about staying positive. So I think you've kind of answered a little bit of that about, you know, have that ambition, do that stretch goal, put your head down, get to work. And I think building community and having people around you that can say, man, you're having a really crappy day. Yeah, me too. You know, this is hard sometimes. And I think the more that people try to do it as an individual thing, you know, this is just a me thing, and I'm just going to make sure that I make sure I recycle every day and that's going to fix it. I think we're well past that idea. I think it's more community action and collective action. I wrote a blog on our Substack called Confessions of a Bad Climate Activist, because as you were saying about like elitism, there's this idea like if you care about climate, then you're going to have to meet all these thresholds. You're going to drive, you know, you're not going to drive a car at all. You're going to bike. You're going to be, you know, I can list off all the lifestyle things, but I'm sure I'm going to probably offend somebody. But I just started to go like, you know what? I work on climate, but I also sometimes use saran wrap. Like there's this feeling of like you have to come,
Okay, like, yeah, we
you have
can't
to
do
come at it with a Puritan kind of, you're either fully committed or you're not really doing it. And I think that separates people from wanting to get involved because they don't see themselves as pure enough to actually care. But what you're saying is like, you know, it is going to affect them too. Um, Now just the
just want
last,
to say one thing on that because
yeah,
Catherine Aho, I don't know if anyone knows Catherine Aho.
I
So she's
do.
also an awesome climate scientist. She's a good friend and she is also an evangelical Christian. So she's like very good at communicating to folks that may be in a space where a lot of folks, you know, in the community she's in, she said like they're getting message very mixed, and maybe climate deniers. But she said like that is the worst thing we can do is go tell people like if you've ever used a straw, like you're the worst person. Like, give me a
Yeah.
break. By the way, we did there was an analysis came out recently that there are 50 companies that are the world's largest polluters, and like that's the biggest problem. Like it's scale. That doesn't mean like small actions don't matter. I don't want people to feel like they're disempowered themselves from doing things. That's great. Do things,
Yeah.
do what you can, but we need scale. And that's why it's so important when we think about movements, like what is going to get the action, voting for sure, but also building bigger communities, you know, thinking in a much larger way, but not guilting folks. That is like the worst because that also it sends a message that I am better than you or I can't,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're not going to be able to do it. Like people just trying to get through the day most of the time, right?
Yeah.
Like you have
Yeah.
kids, like often when I have kids, I'm like, oh my God, it was heroic that I got through the day and I did Uber Eats. Like
Yeah.
that sucks. I shouldn't have done Uber Eats, but I don't know, you know, I have to do that because tomorrow I'm going to get up and work on climate and I'm tired. So,
Yep. No, absolutely. And if you want that scale, then the more ways you have to judge and to isolate people away from the movement, the more harm you're doing. So I go to events. It's actually terrible for me with like neighborhood picnics because everybody tries to hide the saran wrap and they're like, "Oh my gosh, Margaret's here!" And I'm like, "It's fine. It's fine. It's okay that you pre-bought cookies. It doesn't matter in a way. You know what I mean? Like it's more important that you care than
yeah.
about you care in a specific way, and I'm not going to shame you for it and you know do better. um Now we have a question here about women, and you co-founded the organization Women Leading in Climate. um you know, obviously you believe that women have a unique contribution to make to climate action or else you wouldn't have done it. But so what contributions or what were the motivations behind it, and have the attitudes towards women in power changed in your time in the public sphere?
I mean, unfortunately, women haven't changed in that we don't have massive numbers of women CEOs. I think we have, someone did a study and it was like we have more CEOs named Mark than women CEOs. So that's like terrible and lame. And leaders globally, when I go to COPs, like climate meetings, it's like maybe 10% if we're really lucky. So we haven't achieved the change we need there, and we do need it. But I mean, if we just work on that, we're going to be waiting a long time. But when I'll take my first example. So I was like a minister, and 2 minutes later, 2 days later, I was off to Paris for the climate negotiations. And it was just very interesting to observe. Like, of course I'm identified as a woman. Like I'm not, but I don't like every day say, oh, you're a woman, like amazing. I don't, that's like, I just like kind of do my thing. But I just observed there were all these amazing women. Like, and it was other ministers. So I was part of this inner group of the negotiations. There are many women ministers there. The head of the climate, the COP, the climate conference, was Christiana Figueres, so a woman from Costa Rica. Laurence Tubiana was the French ambassador, so the French were hosting the COP, and she was totally amazing. Mary Robinson, who you may have heard of, she was the former president of Ireland, the head of UNHCR. She was there pushing the climate justice agenda. We had women business leaders, we had women labor leaders, we had women environmental leaders, and I am 100% sure that we wouldn't have had an ambitious Paris Agreement without them. Pushing in all sorts of different angles because they didn't care. Like they were like, we're going to get this. And they pushed extremely hard. And I think that was just a lesson for me. I was like, oh, whoa, that's really interesting. And then of course, I mean, suddenly I was like the eye of the storm. I was like climate Barbie, and being a woman was super negative. So I'd reach out to these women because they were going through the same thing often. And we were like, all right, well, we're just gonna plow through and we're gonna do this. And it's really important and our voices matter. And I've seen it. I mean, look, you can start with Greta, one girl who just sat in front of her legislature, and then eventually had a massive movement that made leaders, heads of state have to act on climate. So, but I see it women in boardrooms, often the women that are in charge of like ESG or climate. So they're not the CEOs, but they're the ones pushing hard in the classrooms, in the labs, running environmental organizations, engaged in their community. And I just thought, like, once again, transformational change comes in a lot of different ways. And I'm all about scale. So I was like, oh my gosh, if we could just channel the power of these women, whether it's, in their professional capacity or as moms or as grandmothers or as leaders in the community, like that's extremely powerful. So I have an organization. I mean, we work at different levels with women, but it's called Women Leading on Climate. And it's not super formal because I'm not into in clubs. I'm from Hamilton. Like we're not really into in clubs. It's just like, how do we get more ambitious action? So it's not women for the sake of women. It's like, okay, what do we need to do? So we're now talking about with some of the women that I work with globally, okay, we didn't get a fossil fuel phase out. We did get like, we're going to move away from fossil fuels, but we got a tripling of renewables. How are we going to ensure the tripling of renewables is real? That the countries actually in their new climate targets actually have policies that are going to enable that. And we got to continue to push fossil fuel phase out. And so we're like brainstorming, where are we going to do it? What are the moments? How can we each bring groups in? How can we get women business leaders pushing governments because they need to hear those voices? So I just think it's really powerful. And I think that my book club, I realized the power of women because like everyone was like, oh my gosh, it must be terrible for you. It was definitely really, really annoying. And that's an understatement, but I would call it my book club. It wouldn't even be book club night. And anyway, I wouldn't have read the book because I had no time. And I'd be like, come to my house, emergency. And like, I don't know how many of my girlfriends, but they would just show up at my house that night. And they didn't, and that was also powerful because I just knew they had my back. And so of course, men are super important and we need men to support women. But women, I have just found, I won't say the word, but I say no, whatever. But they just like, they get to work. They aren't, dramatic about it. They most of the time don't care about like, getting super recognized. Often they're low key, but they are the movers, shakers in the communities. They make a lot of decisions in the household, but decisions that can have broader impacts. So I just think it's really important to bring women together as another way to get transformative action.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of my female mentors said to me that from her perspective, from her experience, women seem to understand power with and power for a little bit more intuitively versus power over. And so I do think about that, about making sure if you are close to power, that it's power for and power with, not about your own ego stroking. And that's men and women are capable of that for sure. Last question here. We're moving forward. The polarization, as you can see, is growing, and there seems to be a real increasing urgency surrounding environmental issues. how do you maintain your optimism? And is there additional advice that you haven't given already, or just do you want to underscore things? But those that are feeling overwhelmed by not only the current pace of progress in addressing climate change or climate challenges, but also seeing politicians making really scary decisions, particularly in Ontario, because that's where we're based. What kind of advice or things would you say to help maintain optimism?
Well, first, it's a French saying because I went to a French school in Hamilton, but on lâche pas. I don't know if anyone knows, but like you never give up. So lâche pas, like it's just like you just have to like it's not going to be perfect. And climate action will it's going to be challenging. Like the trends are very positive. Like we are seeing, the price of renewables, the price of battery storage is like both price going down, but efficacy going up. And the projections for peak oil and gas, even in the face of an illegal war with Russia, Russia's illegal war with Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East, like the trends are positive. The challenge is we do have headwinds. And so, I mean, part of my advice, and I feel like sometimes Canadians don't like this, is you have to fight. Like it's just a thing. As I said, I'm Irish. My grandfather fought for Irish independence. People thought that was never going to happen. So I think we need to be ready to bring people together as much as we can, but to fight politicians that are not acting in the interests of Canadians, i.e., everything, the risks to Canadians if we don't take climate action, the risk to our economy, the risk to our health. Like I think we do have to fight, and we have to fight entrenched interests, oil and gas. Like I tried to work with oil and gas, and it's bananas now. They make historic record profits, not because they're brilliant, but because of an illegal war. And then they plow those profits back to shareholders, largely not Canadians. And then they demand subsidies from Canadians while they're not investing at scale and clean. And then they're the ones why the reason people are paying a lot for heating oil and gas is because the price of heating oil and gas is charged by these companies, and they are the cause of the climate crisis. So we do have to fight entrenched interests. But I think also, like, we have that, once again, it gets back to we just have to be practical. We have the solutions and it's moving forward. We just need to accelerate them because I have no doubt that we will achieve net zero because we didn't get to the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We got smarter. So like we have better solutions, but the problem is we have to be disciplined and it's not going to be easy. And there are going to be setbacks like TMX. I know people are very disappointed. They're going to be like, it's going to be lurching. I think the one thing that does really worry me though is disinformation. And as I say, related to that online hate, because both of those disempower people. Like disinformation literally gives people the wrong information. And so then they believe things that aren't true. And we are seeing some indication that levels of understanding that climate change is man-made and real, going down, including in Canada. So obviously that's a major concern. Although we're now getting into the space that it's like too expensive. Like there's other campaigns that are going on that, you can do lots of LNG, that the solution to fossil fuel climate crisis is more fossil fuels. But there's that going on. But related to that is online hate, because it is true. Like, who wants to go into politics right now? Yep. Like I didn't leave because I was pushed out. To be honest, sometimes I was like, this is great for a fight because like I look like a normal person just trying to do my thing. And like I have these people putting stickers, Doug Ford putting stickers that don't stick on pumps, penalty of huge fines. So, I would kind of use that. But, for regular people, the idea of going into politics, in particular women, if you're a minority, a member of the LGBTQ2+ community, if you're Indigenous, like it's not a really nice place. So hate is a real problem. So we unfortunately have to fight multiple things at the same time because we do need good politicians going in. But look, I just think we can do it. I think we can do it. I think one, it's inevitable because people are now seeing the impacts. It's not like this thing like, oh, in the future, you're going to see these impacts climate change. We just had the worst wildfire season. We had to evacuate a capital. Like their kids couldn't go out and play soccer. We had a child who died because they had asthma and the air pollution was so bad. So You know, I think there are multiple factors, but we are going to have to fight and we're going to have to be disciplined, i.e., you have to figure out scale. Like, what is the most important thing? So, we've already said it. It's not like guilting your friend because they're not perfect. It's like really being disciplined. Like, our biggest source of emissions in Canada are oil and gas. That's just like a fact. They're going up. It's 33% of our emissions. We have to focus on the thing and not get too distracted on everything else that we have to do. I mean, there are major things we have to do by buckets. But I actually, I don't know, maybe it's just my nature. Like, I'm just like, I don't know, hard things are hard. We can do it. We have solutions. I wouldn't do it if I thought we couldn't do it. It's like my riding was very hard. I had to run for 2 years and we knocked on more than 100,000 doors, but I knew we could win. I wouldn't go do it if I didn't think we could win. So we can win, but we will need people. And I think just any time you're talking to your friends or neighbors, like, there are always opportunities to have conversation, not directly about climate and like you should care and then they feel guilty. But you can talk about, oh wow, like this is really bad, weird weather. Like we're really seeing the impacts of climate change. Like then they can think about it. Or I don't know. I think that there are different ways. Everyone has their own ways to speak to their friends and neighbors. I do think the polarization is problematic, but I think it is actually overplayed.
Mhm.
I think it's a lot driven by politicians and bots and special interest groups. It doesn't mean that it isn't real and having an impact on people. But I do think it's probably less than we think. One thing I would love, and probably, I think you've probably all heard about it, but citizens assemblies. Like, I think if we did some citizens assemblies on climate, I think you could bring, having seen how they work, that you could bring together different folks. So you could bring an oil and gas worker together with someone from downtown Toronto with an Indigenous, leader from a community, or just an Indigenous, just a regular person from an Indigenous community, a young person. And I think we could come together. If you understand the parameters of the problem, you understand the science, you understand what solutions are, you understand like, the jobs piece and everything, you could get actually better solutions. So I'm somewhat hopeful that we can move to that model sometimes, and in communities, there's an opportunity to do that. France did it, and they banned short haul flights. There was no way politicians would ever do that. So I think that there are other tools and innovations we can use, but the most important thing is people do not give up. Do not give up under any circumstances. It's too important, and we have the solutions. But we're just going to have to keep on keeping on, and we're going to have to bring on broader groups. As I said, like there's
Yeah.
ways to reach people. And I think like religious groups, really good opportunities. Social justice is so critically important as an angle to climate.
Yeah, no, I
So
agree. I think building that community, not trying to do it on your own, and recognizing that when you engage in a fight, it's not going to be roses, and like it's not all going to be easy. So I think preparing for that, and also, we tell people, try to find joy throughout the day. Like, this is supposed to be making the world better. If you make your world terrible by, you hate your life because you're just so stressed out all the time, like you're not really
no,
uh
have fun. I also say
have
that to people.
fun.
Like, it has to be fun. Like, if you don't think I have fun in life, I mean, sometimes I think things are just ridiculous and I laugh. And like, maybe that's my way of dealing with it. But yeah, you have to have fun. Remember my book club girls? Like, I called them up and we'd have some glass of wine and potato chips. I'd be like, this is heaven. And
Yeah,
we didn't talk about terrible things. We just talked about our kids or whatever. So you have to make it not a grind. Like,
right.
this is like, it's a long-term project. So also have fun. So hopefully all of you will hang out afterwards, and I don't know, like
Well, we've had free pizza already. We've had fruit
like
and
it doesn't
veggies.
get better.
You
Doesn't
know,
get
we've
better.
we've had a great time, and I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry about the audio, but I think your words came through, and just really appreciative of your time and the wisdom you've shared with all of us. I know for everyone that's connected to us listening, that we all don't want to do the grind, but we're also doing it together. So that makes it worthwhile. So thank you so much,
Like pow,
Catherine.
boom. Thank you.
Thank you for the inspiring talk. And to everybody else, have a great evening. And I thank you so much for attending.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.